Well, thank you all for being here. I'll start by giving a brief introduction of the panel. We're excited for this discussion, and we will hop right into it. So first, Khushbu Sakaria is VP of Innovation and Product Development at Bozzuto. She's focused on prop tech adoption, has done business development and branding and other functions for about 8 years, I believe. Bozzuto, if you're not familiar, has a managed portfolio of about 75,000 units, one of the largest and most forward-thinking managers in the market. Josh Viner, Senior Manager at Vacasa, leads their multifamily and partnership efforts. Vacasa is a full-service property management software for over 13,000 properties. Josh has a background in hospitality and tech and has been in those industries for almost a decade. Andrew Ackerman, Managing Director at Dreamit Ventures. Dreamit is a venture fund and accelerator that's been responsible for launching over 300 startups worldwide. Andrew joined about 5 years ago, where he launched Dreamit's EdTech Accelerator, and in the last 2 years has also launched their Urban Tech Accelerator. And then finally, Greg West, CEO at Zom Living. It's been over 2 decades, I think.
Yep, 22 years.
Yeah, where Greg has developed dozens of unique multifamily properties focused on innovation in architecture and technology. All right, with no further ado, I'd like to start off and just get a sense from each of you of what your organization's top priorities are right now around technology adoption, what you're investing in, what you're building from each of you.
Do you want me to start?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so the way that we are focusing for the next year, I would say, is in 4 different core spaces. Number one, what is the impact to our business model? So we have not only a management company, but also a development company and a construction company. And we know that with increased urbanization, it creates affordability issues, and therefore there have been iterations in just housing product, right? So you have co-living, you have short-term rentals, you have housing as a service, looking at subscription modeling for leasing. So how do those providers disrupt our space, and then how do we leverage those disruptors as opportunities? And that can impact the way that we're underwriting our current deals and even looking at new deals. And then the second piece is the impact to our physical building. So how are we future-proofing our physical assets and creating these high-performing buildings? And in that space, it's focused on IoT, spatial analytics, telecom, what is our telecom strategy to create connectivity, and then, of course, real-time data procurement. The third piece is the impact to customer experience. So how are we creating these experiences that are rewarding, normal, easy for the customer, and looking at that end-to-end customer journey map. And the last piece is to create long-term customer value, and that, of course, is done through loyalty and advocacy.
So from Vacasa's perspective, building on what you said, the biggest piece from a multifamily side is actually anything that reduces risk between long-term residents and guests. And for anybody that has a multifamily building with a combination of short-term guests and residents, there's some natural tension that exists, but it doesn't have to be the horror stories that people might hear. I think Nido that came out and sort of disrupted their with a bit of a PR mishap. There's a lot of ways for it to be really seamless and really a value add to the community. So anything that we're doing towards that is number one. But we're a growth company as well. So there's a lot of technology investment that Vacasa is making in how we grow our business, both from a property management perspective, both by individual home sales to our real estate program that's opening up brokerages in the biggest states that we operate in, as well as our acquisitions team.
Cool. Greg, why don't you go first? I have a reason for that.
All right, fair enough. I don't know what that is. I'm kind of scared.
Don't worry about it. It happens.
we have for a long time adopted technology and some of the features that we use in our, particularly on the luxury end of what we build, the smart thermostats and the keyless entry being the most obvious things. And our customers respond very favorably to those things, and we're starting to roll out a more fully integrated smart home systems in our projects to not only control those devices, but also control switches and outlets within the unit that you could, activate through your phone on an application or with audio cues within your apartment, and customized settings, have movie time or nighttime or whatever you like. And we've just started to do this. We're finding, a lot of interest in our customers and a lot of willingness to pay for it, which creates more value for us.
Cool. Okay, the reason I asked them to go first is because my priorities are exactly their priorities. So I'm going to, Dream, it's a venture fund. If I don't find companies that are meeting their needs, I don't make money, and I'm not in it for the altruism. So when I hear Greg talk about the keyless entries and the thermostats and all that, great, I got virtual key. I'm going to introduce him to them in 5 minutes. And to you, of course, also, because they deal with the short stay market as well. When I hear Khushbu talk about operational savings, I'm like, well, that's why I introduced you to String Bean. So my job is more than anyone in this room, I listen to them. If they're ready to partner with companies like that, I need to find them companies that are at the cutting edge, but mature enough to service companies of their scale. They can't just be two guys with an idea. They have to be companies that are corporate ready. They've got some revenue. They've got referenceable customers. They have a solution that works out of the box. So my priority is finding companies that do exactly what they say, that are exactly ready.
Great. So Greg, you mentioned smart home technology as something you're putting in your properties. I think that's a great example of a piece of technology or multiple pieces of technology that have, over the last few years, in very recent history, shifted from something that's a nice-to-have differentiator to something that many might consider, if not now, in the near future, a need-to-have amenity. And this is a question for the whole group. To what extent is the innovation that you're focusing on defensive in nature, right? Is it innovate or die, or is it innovate to stand out?
Fear or greed, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's always a little bit of both, but Greg, why don't you?
I don't think the whole home smart technology is necessary right now. I think it could be. It's in our future. When we started adopting technology with the thermostats and the keyless entry, that was an added feature, but I think that is today a necessity, and we only started doing that, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, somewhere along those lines. But there are other things that technology related that are absolute necessities. People don't want to go and interact with a human to get their packages anymore. They want to go to a place 24 hours a day to retrieve that. And the way that we communicate with the people that live in our buildings through various systems about not only their needs within their apartment, but the announcements and communication about what's going on in the community, that's absolutely ubiquitous now and a must-have.
Yeah, the way that I look at multifamily is product, people, personalization. So product is us as developers, owners in this room, building these beautiful, aesthetically pleasing buildings. People are operators like Bozzuto, and do you guys manage properties too?
We
yeah,
do.
so like Zom, bringing these great people and resources to the property to operate the property. And then the next piece, which is missing in multifamily, is personalization. And personalization and connectivity that is created through technology. So I imagine a very simple scenario where I come to my apartment building, I use my phone to access the garage, and then I use it to access, the elevator, get into my unit, use it to come into my unit. My unit is set up for me. My temperature is set. Maybe my show that I want to watch is on. And then the building delivers my packages to my door 10 minutes after I arrive because they know that I've entered the building. And when I think about the backbone, the technology that's needed to fulfill this, it's really just very simple. It's integrated Wi-Fi throughout the building. It's setting up your unit with IoT infrastructure, and then it's having unified access control. So it's something that we could create now and create this really fulfilling, personalized experience for our customers.
I think from our perspective in partnering with Greystars and other groups to manage multifamily units, we look at what's absolutely necessary. And so keyless entry, as an example, is absolutely necessary for us, especially as we have guests coming in on, maybe not necessarily a nightly, but certainly weekly basis. When we think about other things, the water monitoring and things like that are nice to haves for now. I mean, we're mostly working in buildings where that's not necessarily, the age of the building may not be an issue. But a simple one that I think most operators in this space are, and if they're not, they should be, is working with noise monitoring solutions to ensure that there are, that it's not any neighbor that's calling about an issue. It's that there's an alert that happens automatically if the decibel level breaches a certain amount. So that's a simple one that might not be for all long-term residents, but from a short-term perspective in operating in multifamily, that's something that's important for us.
Gotcha. What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing lead to maybe slower adoption than we would otherwise see in the short-term rental space? It seems like in multifamily in general, we've seen a lot of venture dollars flow into this short-term rental space. I think we have some folks from Sonder in the audience. That's one example of a company that's raised quite a bit to focus on this problem, and yet it seems like a lot of owners are still lagging behind. What are some of the reasons you think for that friction?
I mean, the biggest reason that I hear when we're talking to buildings and larger companies is, in one sense, there's not necessarily an alignment on price. So, what they are expecting in terms of revenue may be realistic, but not necessarily long-term profitable for both partners. Another thing that we hear commonly is guest screening. And they expect a level of guest screening that I would say isn't possible. And the reason I say isn't possible is that short-term rental guests, we're not going to get social security numbers. Or insurance numbers. I'm Canadian, so I apologize. I always mix that one up. But doing a full criminal background check is possible when you have that, but even then it's not 100% accurate. So we're looking at other ways that, from a digital verification as well as identity verification, taking a selfie that matches your face with the picture on your identity card. There's lots of solutions that work, but many multifamily operators don't necessarily see that. They don't necessarily weight it the same, where I think about it in a way that it's actually perhaps a better check, especially if you're referencing it against, their billing address and an Amazon account that has a long history of spending with it. Like, that's a way to kind of tell that this is someone this is who they are.
I'll take a stab at it also. But I'll take it. When I talk to startups, one of my key questions is why now? Right? If something could have been done years ago and no one's doing it, there's usually a reason, and that might be that no one cares about it. But I try to apply the same filter to the industry as a whole. So why hasn't real estate adopted sooner than others? And ultimately my theses are there's two elements. Number one is generational. You got an old school, they grew up on like DOS, if that, with Sharpies on printed out emails. They're dying out. The next generation, they're literally dying out. The next generation is coming in, they're getting operational control of the company. They grew up on computers and increasingly on smartphones. So there's adoption, a willingness on that end. The other piece, which is a little more subtle, is the data element for it. Until fairly recently, we didn't have the foundational technologies to have data. The guys like Yardi and Real Pages, you go back 10 years ago, these things didn't exist, so you didn't have anything to hang other innovation on. So to the extent that now we have these foundational technologies, it opens up the door to the second and third generation. And we see it very much hitting a tipping point, which is why I'm not doing ed tech anymore and I'm doing urban tech.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to chime in. For the short-term rental aspect, it's funny, we have a resident advisory board. It's 2,500 Bozzuto residents that have opted into just providing us feedback with these short surveys. And we sent out a survey probably last year about short-term rentals, Airbnb, and the reaction was a resounding no. We do not want short-term rentals in our property. And then we asked them at the same time, would you rent out your unit on Airbnb? And they said yes. And it's like, looking at those survey results, you're like, okay, you don't want these people in your building, but you're willing to do it yourself. So clearly the customer does not know what they want yet. And so we went through this really educational process because from a management perspective, you want to create the least amount of disruption possible for your resident. So it was all about understanding the value that this flexible leasing landscape could bring to us from not only a management perspective, but also a development perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that kind of catch-22 around what the consumer ultimately wants happens not only at the resident level, but also at the owner level oftentimes. And I think Andrew was getting to that. How do you as an investor, Andrew, deal with that, where oftentimes the company that's going to end up adopting the technology may not, over the past 5 years, have been ready to adopt it, and maybe the organization isn't set up to adopt it now. It's easy when dealing with Bozzuto or Zom that's very forward thinking and is willing to adopt technology. But when you see something that's an obvious conclusion, but the industry isn't ready for it, how do you know when to make that investment?
There's so many flip comments I can make, but I'm going to try not to. So way early in my career, there was a venture capitalist who was giving a speech, and I wish I could remember who it is because I've used this quote before. He was talking about an investment he made, and then he said, well, we were too early. And then he stopped and he says, you know what the difference is between being too early and wrong? It's not a damn thing, right? So that's part of what makes my job interesting. I got to figure out when it's ready, but not too early. And part of the way I do that is within Dream, we have a network of customer sprint partners who tend to be the more forward-thinking operators, GCs, property managers, landlords, you name it. By and large, the people who are less tech forward or less willing to adopt don't end up on stage. So I could say I just look at who's actually on a panel, and those are good prospects. But really the art form is for me to have those lines of communication open, understand what the industry is ready for, and then get companies that I think are in the zone. But here's the beauty of it. From my perspective, I don't invest until after I've made those introductions. It's part of our program. So I get to see the startups that we've kind of tentatively selected to invest in pitch to a dozen or 2 dozen property managers, GCs, architects, you name it. And if the clients aren't leaning forward, then I know it's not ready and I'm not going to invest.
Great. And then that same question, I guess the flip side for Greg and Khushbu is, what are you doing in your organizations internally to make sure that you're part of that forward-thinking group as opposed to staying in the past?
We are aware of technology and we follow innovation, but I don't have that much interest in being a pioneer. I would rather somebody else be first and someone else prove to me. You were talking about the startups. Like, my attitude about them, as you described it, is exactly correct. Like, I don't want to be the property owner who you figure out how to work out all the kinks with. I want to talk to the 3 references you have who can explain to me how well it works and maybe explain to me what the problems are that I can work through and manage around. But being a first adopter in the technology space is not part of our plan.
You mentioned 3 to 5 good logos are kind of our unofficial benchmark.
One of the things I could add from listening to the earlier panel, I think it was Travis Connor, he mentioned that a lot of the innovation kind of is very incremental, especially in real estate. And I would agree with that. And I think this conversation about thinking about short-term rentals, not people not knowing what they want, but corporate housing has been around for 30, 40 years, and it operates as a corporate client. And this is not a fundamental change to corporate housing. There is a change from being 30 plus days to 2-3 days. But if we think about that in the greater context of having strangers in our building, there are some things that need to be addressed, but it's not a brand new revolutionary change to the industry.
That's great advice for startups here. If you can piggyback a familiar theme, it makes adoption a lot easier.
Like, as our team learned, we don't go in and talk about short-term rentals. So when we speak to a leasing agent, we ask for corporate leases. That's what we're signing. So,
Gotcha. So that's a good segue. One of the things I wanted to ask, as investors, as operators, developers, what are some things, or maybe just the top thing that you wish technology vendors that come to you, whether they're pitching you for an investment or pitching you for a pilot, what are some of the things that you wish that they knew about the industry, about your business, that would make it easier for you to adopt their technology?
Well, the reason that I made the comment that I just made is that if I adopt that technology and it doesn't work, I've ruined my relationship with my customer that was otherwise fine. I had a good relationship. I built a great building, they live there, they're happy, and I introduced this technology between us that doesn't work. They're mad at me now. And so what the most important thing in my view is that the people who are creating this technology understand the customer experience and respect the owner's role in that experience, and that if you're offering or pitching, that you're bringing something that enhances that relationship, doesn't detract from it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the tech industry as a whole has operated under the assumption that disruption is a good thing in all cases, right? Move fast and break things. When it sounds like that's maybe not the best approach when disruption involves the lives of residents.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think, there's three things. One is we're a third-party manager, so we have over 80 clients, and just understanding that the decision-making process sometimes is really slow, unlike what happens in the tech world. Secondly, we have these existing property management systems that are dinosaurs, and you have to integrate with them. There's no way around it. And then third, just understanding the nuances of our business. So multifamily is not very complicated, but you just need to understand the teams. And even when I entered my role, I'd been at Bozzuto for 7 years already, and I still took the first month of my new role to be a concierge. I went to be a sales leasing agent. I went to our 55 plus property and shadowed the property manager, because I like to understand the business from the inside out, and I've never been in operation. So that was my way of understanding it, and I do that all the time. I call our site teams to understand what is happening, what is their feedback, and that's how I can much more easily vet technology.
Even as a management company that's forward-thinking, we're only 10 years old, but we have around 9 or 10,000 homeowners, and we're pretty careful when we're going to roll out a new program, because without them, we don't have a business. So they're our primary customers, and if we're going to introduce something new, whether that's a new smart lock program, anything that's monitoring noise, I mean, we make sure we have a small group that we'll do pilots and tests with, but they're, homes that maybe some of our employees own or some of our board members own first, rather than we're rolling it out across our entire market. So we're as much as we're forward thinking, we're conservative in nature when rolling out a new technology program.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll just add, it's why it's extremely hard for me to invest in a company that doesn't have someone with deep real estate experience on the team. If it's an all-tech team or people from outside of the industry, it's an uphill battle. Because number one, they don't know the nuances, generally speaking. And even if they do, it's hard for them to prove to these guys that they know the nuances and they're not going to screw up on something that's kind of basic but critical.
Gotcha. Do any of you have examples of the alternative to that, where things have failed, whether it's something internally in your organization or an idea that you've had, or something that's come from an outside industry that wasn't a good fit for the multifamily industry? Or even lessons you've learned. It doesn't have to be failure.
I think bringing, this experiment about bringing hotel guests into an apartment building it's still that. It's an experiment. And I don't know that anybody in this room can say it's a mistake or not a mistake, and maybe people will figure out how to manage through it. I'm trying to do it and experimenting in my own buildings, but that's something that's in process in my view.
One of the things that I learned as part of doing what we do is I try to get a feel for any given partner organization. How much change can they handle at one point? Like, how many pilots can they run? So if I'm talking to the president of a company or chief innovation officer or whomever I'm talking to, I need to understand what their bandwidth is, right? They can only go back to the line so many times and say, I want you to try this startup or this piece of software. So getting a feel for that is something that I've kind of learned over the past couple of years.
Yeah, internally, it's all about vision, alignment, and execution. So you have to make sure everyone from the executive level to in the field people share your vision, you are aligned in what you want to accomplish, and then you have a plan for execution.
How does that differ for the various roles within the multifamily ecosystem, whether it's fee managers or owner-operators or developers? Are there different risks for each of those parties, different opportunities for each of those parties that the tech vendor ecosystem should be aware of?
So that's a great question. I'm going to ignore it for the next 10 seconds while they think of their answer. No, I'm joking. So the reason that's a great question is we get startups that come in, oh, we sell to multifamily. And I tell them, that's not the answer to the question. Give me the department. Give me the title of the person. Tell me that you know what's their bonus structure set, what gets them promoted, what gets them fired. Like, at the end of the day, you sell to a person, more likely a group of people, and you need to understand what gets them out of bed at night, what they fear, what they're looking for. If you can tell me that level of granularity, then I have some comfort in your ability to sell. You can still screw it up when you actually have to do it, but at least I know you're pointed in the right direction. And all the people you mentioned all have similar in some cases, but sometimes critically different incentive sets and interests.
I would put a twist on the answer to the question. Like technology has changed the way I think about amenities and the common areas that we put in our buildings. We're generally making apartments smaller and smaller to address the affordability issue. Everybody knows we're making amenities bigger and bigger, but you can use technology to customize those amenities and make them part of your resident space. So we're building more and more offices and conference rooms because people want to work from home. Even in an urban place, which it's counterintuitive, you live, next to all the office buildings, but you still work at home because you want to live in that urban place. But through technology, giving the people the ability to reserve a room for an hour or a day, to have a quiet place or have a meeting, to reserve a pool cabana, to a massage treatment room, to set them up for a live fitness class, it just makes me think over and over and over again, how am I programming and maximizing the physical space that I build through the way that people can use it and access it through technology in ways that they never could before. The only way that'll always happen in hotels, right? Because you have staff and people can operate it. Well, we don't have that in multifamily, but it can be automated through technology, and it's kind of a sea change in the way that you think about things.
Yeah, I think my advice to startups is don't solve a siloed problem. I see all these tenant engagement apps and they solve for a couple of things. They don't solve for the end-to-end experience, and we don't need 25 different technologies on site. It's the same thing with packages. I've had robot vendors approach me. I'm like, well, you haven't solved the logistics side of the problem. You're actually going to create more logistics issues for us, although your robot seems really cool. But you have to think about just the entire end-to-end user experience and don't solve for the siloed one piece of the problem, because it's not helpful for us.
So wait, that's a great piece, right? I've had tons and tons of operators and managers say, I don't want 5 apps. I don't want a separate app for the front door, then for their apartment, then to manage a smart home, then to pay rent, then to put a work order in. So my advice to anyone out here who's building anything that's tenant-facing or guest-facing is build your product as its own API. Right? Your actual own labeled product should be built on your own API, and you should be equally comfortable being a piece of someone else's app or being the main app that other people plug in.
It's 100% true, because we stop using the ones that don't cooperate that way. Just because no one wants 5 apps is a low number, by the way. A lot of our properties we could have as many as 10 apps to do all the stuff that we offer, which is ridiculous. Hey, here's your keys and now download 10 apps. It's kind of a silly thing.
My only advice from a selling perspective, since that's been my role for the last couple of years, has been nothing replaces in-person visits. Even though it's a technology play, and we can do things, we can do webinars from a multifamily perspective. If you're selling to an individual building and you probably don't want to go directly to Bozzuto headquarters without any customers, your best bet is to go find some smaller operators and visit them in person. And if you can't sell them, then you may want to revisit the business plan.
Absolutely. So I think it's time to open up the panel to some questions from the audience. For those of you who've downloaded the app, I believe it's in the left-hand menu, and then if you scroll down to Q&A, you can put your questions in there. We have a couple that we've already received, but please keep them coming. I think we can start with the first one is, for multifamily rentals, how do you use technology to keep tenants happy, avoid issues like police constantly visiting, trash on the ground, and constant evictions?
You're
Wow.
the one person who's not answering that question.
Well,
It's a large question.
Yeah, I mean, technology doesn't help us with all those things. I mean, part of it is screening the people that come and live in our communities, and you need to be good about that as an operator, and that's not really a technology issue. But I think to the question of keeping your residents happy and keeping them engaged, I'm very interested in these social platforms that are being developed to try to, people can live in a hallway next to each other and never speak, even in the elevator, but creating a network within your building to socially connect people, have them get together, be able to find commonalities is a really interesting way to perhaps create value for the landlord because people stay longer and be willing to pay more to live there.
So this is where I'm a contrarian. Like, I'm the guy who doesn't even want to talk to you in the elevator. Yeah. So the social apps are a poor fit for me, but that's okay, right? I mean, tenants are not a monolithic, similar group of people. Some will resonate with some features, some amenities, and others with others. What I found very interesting, to riff on the amenities discussion you had before, are virtual amenities, like the ability to have a system where tenants can, order the massage therapist to come to their room, or the Pilates instructor, or the dog walker, or the cleaning service come in, and to be able to do that all within the property's own branded app. Like, that's one of the other things that I think it lets you add value to your property without taking up real estate. And that, because I'm lazy, that resonated with me.
Well, I mean, not everyone is an extrovert. It's funny, we have events like Wine Down Wednesday at our properties, and it's the same 10 to 15 people in a 250-unit building that show up because they're the social group. But if you think of engagement, it's thinking about engagement on a one-by-one basis, and the more engaged someone is, the more likely they are to renew and be less disruptive to your property. So just coming up with the touch points that help you engage, even through technology, rather than think of just social communities.
Gotcha. Okay, we have another question. How were Zom and Bizzuto, and feel free to chime in if you have anything to add as well, focused on elevating the in-home living experience for the residents in order to drive retention?
Is that question asking about IoT?
I think it's more so anything you're doing to drive lease renewals, keep people from moving out on the existing resident side. There's so much work that we're doing in that space. I mean, we have done this whole customer journey exercise where we studied what people want from the moment that they actually start searching, but also when they move into a property, to what creates loyalty and advocacy, which is really our ultimate goal, right? Creating long-term customer value, decreasing customer acquisition costs. So there is, we have a property called the Hepburn in DC where the concierge will bring up the groceries and set it up in their fridge. He'll watch their dogs if they're gone for a week. Like, we take it to another level. There was a man sitting on the rooftop just waiting for his friend, and one of the leasing agents was talking to him. He's like, yeah, I'm waiting for my friend. I haven't seen her in a long time. So they arranged for a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses to go to the rooftop. I mean, those are the experiences that keep someone staying at a property. So how do we replicate that through technology sometimes, but also supplement that with human experiences?
Just hiring Four Seasons employees?
Well, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think the technology
The robot brings it up.
is more impactful on the front end of the sales experience to get someone to initially commit to living there. I'm not saying it's not impactful on the resident retention, because we're trying. I mentioned the social apps and things that we're working on, but on the back end, it becomes a far more acute economic decision. On the front end, it's emotional. Like you're moving into a new place. There's this technology, and it's all wrapped around this neat thing. And now you've lived there a year, and you've used the technology, and you have a choice, based on this economics to stay or go, have a new experience somewhere else. And it's shocking to me for how little money people will move. The apartments I mentioned getting smaller and smaller. So when you move a couch, a bed, a coffee table, and not much else. So it's a pretty mobile society. So, I hope we do get better at creating retention through technology, but I'm not yet really seeing it being material.
Well, I think, sorry, just to add, the loyalty programs can be really impactful in that. There's companies that are rewarding people for staying longer, taking certain actions. And if you think about like Starwood and Marriott and all of these companies, they're really focusing on building their loyalty programs, because you have to give someone some motivation, I guess, to stay if there is a less expensive apartment that's close by, that's brand new.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I haven't seen a lot of corporate-ready solutions to retention. I've seen a couple of startups that claim to be able to tell when somebody's ready to churn. When you dig under the hood, all they're telling you is like, okay, they just had a kid, so offer them an apartment with one more bedroom, which is okay, but it's not all that insightful. I saw another company where they were basically trying to design the entire building modularly, so that if they did have the other kid, you just take down a wall and now it's an extra bedroom. But you have to redesign an entire building for that, and that room next door has to actually be vacant. So I haven't seen anything in the retention space that I would bring to any of these guys. On the actual prospective tenant, bringing him in, we see a lot.
So Josh, for you, Khushbu mentioned hospitality and some lessons around retention and how you treat your residents that could potentially come from that industry. That's your background, correct?
Yep.
So are there things that you're seeing multifamily adopt, or potential for the multifamily industry to adopt in the future, that it can learn from that industry?
I think Khushbu touched on it, and that would be almost all the things that are not technology and that are really good service. And we're at a real estate and tech conference, so I'm not going to talk about how necessarily. But in the last few minutes that we have, I don't think there's anything that can substitute really good customer experience better than a really warm and welcoming person at the front desk. And when you go to any high-end hotel, they're making that experience based on really well-trained and well-hired and well-managed front desk and people that manage, whether it's valet service or anything, to ensure that the guest experience from the moment they step on the property to the moment they leave is positive. I know that hiring in multifamily is hard, and we're at sort of really low unemployment overall, so that's not an easy thing to solve for, but I don't think there's a technology substitute for that.
I absolutely agree with you. I think in our Class A assets, it's not about replacing human experiences with technology. It's all about supplementing it, enhancing it, creating that aspect of personalization and connectivity that there's no way, 3 people in a leasing office could ever capture that for an entire building. So it's working in tangent rather than replacing.
Seems like maybe an odd point to end on, but not every solution needs to be technology, I guess.
True.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it looks like we're out of time, but thank you all for listening, and thank you to the panel for sharing your thoughts.